You focused on solving equations with rational numbers. Now let's focus on solving inequalities with rational numbers. Just like the previous lesson, you have already learned how to solve equations and inequalities. We're just throwing in decimals and fractions now, so it's a little bit harder, but it's the same process. So there's 4 examples on your note sheet. I want you to actually try all 4, and then you're going to press play and go through, and you'll see my answers. Before you do that, though, copy it on your target, and then notice over here on the right side, I have, is there something special you need to remember? Let's go over this before you try those 4 examples. When you're solving an inequality, is there something special that you need to remember? Are inequalities any different than equations? Hopefully you're saying yes. And what is the difference? What is something special that you have to remember about inequalities? You might want to write this down to remind yourself. Remember, when you are solving, you must flip the sign of the inequality if you multiply or divide by a negative number. So when you are solving, you must flip the sign of the inequality if you multiply or divide by a negative number. That doesn't mean if you see a negative number in there somewhere, you're always going to flip the sign, only if during the process of solving you multiply or divide by a negative. I also put my little PEMDAS undoing up there. Remember that when we're solving an equation, when there's more than one step to do, we want to undo order of operations. So if you see multiplication and subtraction, you should undo subtraction first. So once you have those notes jotted down and your target, go ahead and pause the video, try all 4 examples. They are a little tough and you have a lot of room on your paper, so you may need to use the margin to do some of the multiplication and dividing of these numbers. Do not use a calculator here. Go ahead and try these, then press play. Hopefully you've tried all the equations. That's how you're going to learn if you try them first. Now you can check and correct your work. For this first one, there shouldn't be a lot to correct. Hopefully you did really well in this. You see a plus 9.3, so we subtract it from both sides. And we're doing that subtraction because we want these to cancel on the left. They do cancel. That leaves me just my variable, just r. And I didn't multiply or divide by negative, so I keep the inequality symbol. This part's the part that may require a little work on the side. We have 2 numbers. Subtracting is the same as adding a negative. And when you add a negative, now we're adding opposite signs. So if we're adding different signs, we actually subtract. But before I do the subtraction, I always think, okay, which digit's larger? The 9.3 is larger, it's a negative, so I know right away my answer is going to be negative. Then do the larger minus the smaller, and you get 5.1. So r has to be any number greater than negative 5.1. Can r be negative 5.1? No. But r could be negative 4, negative 3.111, 0, 29, 100,000, and so on. Okay? On the next 3 examples, they were a little tougher. So check your work here. There's a lot going on. On this first example 2, let's kind of separate this a little bit. On this first example 2, you have a couple of steps that you have with the W. So undo order of operations, I subtracted 10.1 first. I changed 1/2 to a decimal so that I could do the subtraction. And notice I did the subtraction right on the side. Same thing, subtraction is the same as plus a negative. So now I know I have different signs, so I find the difference. My larger digit was negative, so my answer there is going to be negative. Now take a look. To get W by itself, I have to divide by a negative number. As soon as I write that, I immediately go down here and flip the sign. Then I do the work. These are going to cancel. I get to W alone. And over here, remember to do decimal division, you have to move the decimal over. So if you're moving the decimal over on top 1, we move the bottom over 1 as well. This division is going to be the same as dividing 96 by 16, and a negative divided by a negative is a positive. And I already flipped the sign, so I keep it there. On example 3, you have a couple options, a couple things going on with r. So we undo the subtraction first by adding 4 to both sides. And then r is being divided, so we multiplied by 0.8 or 8/10. We didn't multiply by a negative, so we just keep that sign the same. And we multiply this and we get 8.8. So 8 times 11 would be 88, and then move the decimal over 1 for that. So you could leave it like this, or you could rewrite it if you like rewriting the variable first. I always take a look. The sign has the open end towards the 88, so it still has to keep the open end towards the 8.8. So R is any number less than or equal to 8.8. And the last example, I actually showed you two ways to do it. 3 1/4 t, first thing I would do is change that to an improper, 13/4. Now, you can divide by this fraction. That's what I did over here. If we wanted to get R by itself, we would divide by 13/4 and divide by 13/4. The problem with that is it gets a little messy. So if it's getting messy, another thing that you could do is multiply by the reciprocal. Dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, okay? So when you divide a fraction, you would keep switch flip. Instead of doing all of this work that gets a little messy, from the beginning you could just multiply by whatever you were going to divide by, but flip it. So if I multiply by 4/3, the 4 and the 4 cancel because one's in the numerator and one's in the denominator, and the 13 and the 13 cancel. That's going to leave me just with R. And now I'm multiplying these over here. This was a little tough. 19.5 times 4, I did that first and got 78. And then 78 divided by 13 is actually 6. So R is less than or equal to 6. It's any number less than or equal to 6. So please correct these problems. If you had any mistakes, go pause the video, correct the work, see where you made your mistakes, and try to make sure you don't do that again. You know how to solve inequalities, but it gets a little harder when you have all these decimals and fractions and negatives in there. You're going to do a quick check to try some on your own now.